Hello everybody and welcome online this lunchtime. It's lovely to see so many people here from all over the world. That's what digital technology is all about, so that's great. My name is Janet Barker. I'm OUBS External Engagement Manager, and we are here today with Dr. Peter Bloom from the Open University Business School and David Mudd from the British Standards Institute, BSI. Today, Peter and David will be leading us in the discussion about the fourth industrial revolution and its impact on the future for employees, and data protection. Don't forget that you can view Peter and David in the videos filmed at our Business Perspectives event, Disruptive Technologies and Intelligence, Business Opportunities or Threats, which was held in October of last year. The links are in the resources section of this webinar, and we will also distribute the links in an email after the event. And don't forget, you can put any questions to Peter and David through the chat box, and I'll pose them to Peter and David either as we go along or at the end. I will now hand you over to Peter and David, who will introduce themselves. So over to you first, David.
Thanks, Janet, and thank you everyone for joining us. I won't give you the full life story, just say I've been in industry for around 30 years, focusing on a lot of the technologies that are pertinent to the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things has been my life really for the last few years. So I'm really going to talk through now about the short term, the immediate. Where are we right now today with some of this disruptive technology? And some of the key things to consider, whether you are someone who is developing products that will use the technology or a user yourself. So just waiting for my screen to update. I can see my slide, but I cannot. Okay, Janet, I might have to hand back to you here, as currently I cannot get my slide up on the screen. Good start.
Okay, bear with us, and we have heard that we are getting some echo issues here. We are sorry about this. We'll try and sort this out. Lucy is working hard in the background to try and make sure the slides are working. So bear with us.
Well, in the meantime, I'll carry on with some of the discussion to save time. So we were talking principally about the Internet of Things, which means a lot of things to many people. But I think it's important we get a common definition here. What we're talking about, when we discuss Internet of Things, most people in their minds think of something like the ability to control your lights and your heating via your phone, control it remotely and this kind of thing. That's not really where the disruption really lies. What we're talking about here is the ability of machines to speak to other machines, to learn and to act independently without human intervention. It's that independence and action and learning that really differentiates. So don't think of you controlling your lights and heating via your phone, thinking of your home, learning and understanding what your habits are, what your preferences are, who's where in the house, what the ambient temperature is, what the daylight is, what the weather forecast is going to be, what the best prices of gas and electricity are, where to source them, what's the status of your heating system, that kind of thing, and acting totally independently, providing you with the perfect environment without you having to do a thing. It's that level of disruption we're talking about here, rather than purely the ability to control things remotely. So to start off with, that's been where the focus is. We're now moving more and more into that world of machines acting autonomously, which is really the heart of the discussion today. Let's see, are we there now? Once again, I'm not getting my slides up here. Straight back to Q&A again.
I must apologise, David. Lucy, as I say, is on the chat with the support team. Perhaps if you could just carry on with your talk.
I will carry on with the talk, and
I
will do. I'll carry on with the talk now. I've got my own slides in front of me here. So anyway, we've talked a little bit about what the Internet of Things is, and particularly then in the smart home, but the same things apply when we're looking at a much larger scale. We see more and more now IoT and smart cities. So then we're talking about smart buildings, smart infrastructure, transportation networks, energy, and there's a huge amount of developments there, new exciting products and technologies, all underpinned by IoT. Where it really started, though, was in the factory. Internet of Things really, in the industrial world has been going on since the 80s with modems and this kind of thing. So it's not a new concept there at all. And the latest generation here, we're looking at cyber physical systems. And the real benefits here are not just in things like in having more output through increasing production performance and optimizing maintenance, or less costs, reducing stock, and with improved quality, but it's all about really that differentiation, the ability to customize quickly, and that scaled agility right the way through the supply chain and manufacturing chain. That's again where the real differentiation is. Then over the last year, what I've seen is that same model now moving into retail. So we have what's becoming known as Retail 4.0. And here we're talking about the customer experience and having a personalized and seamless shopping experience from online through to in-store. So right the way through the whole of the purchasing cycle, from need, awareness, selection, purchase and post-purchase, having everything from online through into the store into one homogeneous experience that's tailored to the individual, and also, again, that dynamic response, that scaled agility to respond to changing demand, all underpinned by IoT. So that all sounds well and good. And then the question that I ask whenever I'm working on an IoT project really is, why are you doing this? What's the purpose behind your move into IoT? And whether it's someone who's making a product based on IoT or whether it's somebody who's incorporating IoT into the building, the two responses I hear most often that cause concern are, well, we're doing this, we have to do it. It's embrace it or die. We have to have this technology and or we're going to miss out. Or the other one tends to be, well, it's obvious, isn't it? We've just got one opportunity now. We're upgrading our building. We've got the next product release. We've got to get that technology in there. So let's just get it in there and work out what to do with it later. And it's those two diving in at the deep end and rushing in without thinking through the consequences, that it's those kind of projects that are at most risk and cause the most problems. I'll just see if we are back on now.
Not yet, I'm afraid.
Okay, I will stop.
Carry on.
That's fine. I will carry on talking.
I'll just tell everybody that we do apologise for this, but we will be sending out the presentation pack with the follow-up email, so you won't miss out on this. And I do apologise. It's just it's the talking that's important. So
okay,
thanks so much.
I will carry on. I can talk all day. I love it. Anyway, so when embarking on IoT, the first thing to think of is, what's your strategy here? And that's normally down to where's the money? And the two areas are organizational performance. So this is all about IoT enabling data capture and analysis. And that's all well and good, but unless your organization is set up to respond, then all of that means nothing. To get to the point where you're actually enabling you kind of improved efficiency and profitability, you need to think through what data we're going to capture and why, and then are we set up to actually respond? But more and more, we're now talking about the customer experience. Whereas organizational performance tuning might get you more profitability and might make you more efficient, it's the customer experience that's binary. That will win you the business or not. So this is the area now where there's more and more focus on customer experience. So when you're thinking about a strategy for using IoT, rather than we've got to do this, embrace it or die, or we have to do it refitting the building now, you need to have some kind of strategy that shows where the money's going to come from. And normally that's divided into those two areas. So for employing IoT throughout a retail environment, for instance, your strategy might be improve footfall and spend per basket. And that's delivered through that homogeneous tailored response and a differentiated customer experience. That's what gets the people in the store and encourage them to spend more. On the other side, you also then look to improve the organizational performance and your profitability. And that's where the data analysis of your customers, your employees, and your assets come in, provided you use that data to affect process improvement. So the outcomes then are that improved footfall and spend per basket, and that improved organizational performance and profitability, IoT is only the enabler to that. You need to make sure that you've got everything in place that can actually respond and deliver on the extra information and capability that IoT actually offers you. So why am I focusing on this? Surely we should just embrace the technology and get on with it. It's very, very important to understand where that money is going to come from on your bottom line. Because if you imagine you've got a set of scales here, on one side, there's a load of potential for earning more revenue. But on the other side of the scales, there are two very simple but very important questions. One, will it work? And two, is it secure? And those two questions can potentially lumber you with a huge amount of liability on the other side of the scale. So it's very, very important to have it absolutely clear where the money is going to come from, so that you can then look to invest and make sure that your solution will be interoperate within the environment it's supposed to work and actually function, and secondly, that will actually be secure. I was recently doing a talk at Connected Lighting for Retail, and there were lots of people on the same day following me who were then talking about how their wonderful solutions could help differentiate for their customers. And the next slide I would have got up here goes through, every speaker after me came up with something like, it improves your business process, it improves your space utilization, it improves inventory tracking, it improves merchandise security, it gives you actionable data, it gives you point of purchase promotion, and then there's a whole pile of cash. Woohoo, great, that's brilliant. But all of those things are enablers. They all require the system to respond, and they will all work differently for every single customer. So there is no off-the-shelf IoT solution you can think, I can bring that into my organization, or I stick this onto my product and put it out there, that will work for everybody. So what that means is, you've got to consider that IoT is an enabler. It's not a total solution. So not only do you have to have a strategy and work out what tangible outcomes that you're going to have in terms of improved profitability, improved footfall, and this kind of thing, you then need to look at your individual use case and consider what dependencies there are in your organization and involve all the stakeholders. As with any major change in any organization, there will be a lot of resistance to change. There will be a lot of perceived threat to jobs, a lot of perception here that this technology will have negative outcomes for individuals. So it's very, very important for any project like this to work that you involve all your stakeholders. And that also means your customers as well, because quite often this is a customer focus. We're looking at the customer experience, and you need to make sure absolutely that you are achieving the level of customer benefit that you believe you are. There's been a push over the last 12 months for more and more dramatic and exciting interaction with the customer. And there's been a bit of a backlash against that. There's been a case of, yeah, that's great once, but now I've done that once. I just want something that's simple and effective and delivers benefit. So you've got to make sure that what you're coming up with has real benefit to your customers, and that also you have your entire team, all your stakeholders on board. So the two big risks really, so on the other side of the scale, are interoperability, which sounds a complex word, but it basically means will the system work? And then security. So is the data secure, and also is that product and service secure? So what's at stake here? Whatever big pile of cash you might be chasing on the positive side here with all the benefits it can bring, be assured there's a bigger pile of cash at stake if things go wrong. And one thing that's at stake here that's really difficult to get back is your brand reputation. It takes a long time to build all that up, and it can be gone in an instant, particularly in the digital age here, where one data breach can go viral, one denial of service can go viral, and bang, the reputation's gone. So what do you need to do to protect yourself here? The two areas are, will the system work? And I'll just go through this briefly, really. I've hinted on one thing here, which is it's about the people as well as the technology. So yes, you test the system works, but you test and see how it fails. You do robustness testing, extends beyond the day you install it, and it involves the people. So what that means is you've got to think through beyond day one. And if there's one question that I advise anyone who is considering getting an IoT system into their organization, it's ask the question, how long will this be supported? What works on day one, what interoperates with everything else on day one, will not necessarily be the same situation in day two. We see new threats coming out every day. We see new updates to technology coming out every day. So is the system robust, secure over-the-air updates? What about third-party plugins of software? It's very, very seldom that somebody develops a product totally in-house and has total control over everything that's in it. So what safeguards are there to ensure that product is going to be supported through its desired life? The bigger area of concern, and this is getting bigger by the day really, is system security. The two areas here are, in fact there's three, I do apologize, three areas you need to be secure against, the three big threats. Can the system be hijacked, stopped working, and made dangerous? What kind of things happen here? There was a steelworks in Germany that was latest state-of-the-art factory. A lot of remote monitoring and control was hacked, and they were unable to shut down the blast furnace, and the factory burned to the ground. Just before Christmas, there are reports going around of a nation-state level attack on a power facility where the plan was for the attackers to get in, work out how all the safety systems worked, and then stop them, and then invoke a dangerous situation actually in control of the power generation to actually destroy the whole facility. As it was, when investigating the safety systems, they triggered an alert that shut this system down, and then it was found out that the attackers were in there. Those two systems are extreme, but it shows you the kind of threat that is physically very real. Something that's probably a little bit more closer to most of us was the Mirai Botnet from around, I think it was October 2016. This is typical of many denial of service attacks that we are seeing all the time. What happened here was a company who was involved with kind of online gaming, this kind of thing, decided to try and take out their competitors' servers. The way they did this was look for vulnerable systems that were up there on the internet and easily accessible. They found IP-enabled cameras and recorders, mostly from a common manufacturer that were either under that name or were then rebranded via an OEM route, and there were hundreds of thousands of them available, all vulnerable and easy to hack. Those devices were all hacked, and then all with a bit of malware in there, used to target the competitor's DNS server and bombard it with data. And it was so successful that it actually took out Amazon, Twitter, PayPal, and Spotify, and a lot of the US internet. The interesting thing was, all those cameras still kept functioning as cameras, and all the people that owned them were completely unaware that their systems had been hacked and been used for another purpose. And then we come on to data. This is the one that's been most obvious. In the UK, there was the WannaCry attack on the National Health Service, but there have been many examples of this, Equifax and many others, where either deliberately or inadvertently data is compromised. So those are the three areas that we really, really need to take seriously. Can the products be stopped working and made dangerous? Can they be used to attack something else? Or can they provide a backdoor in from which valuable data can be stolen or ransomed? And that's just today's threat. What's coming tomorrow, we don't know. So that, when you look at that threat scenario, the question everyone asks them, well, surely why can't I just make my product secure? I'll do whatever it takes, make my product secure. And the bottom line is, there is no such thing as completely secure. With the right skills, time, tools, and motive, any system can be hacked. So at this point, there's normally much kind of wringing of hands and thinking, oh, forget it, we might as well give up. The point here is to be as secure as appropriate for your intended use and environment. And then there's a whole set of processes to do with risk reduction, with how resilient you are, not having single point failures, how you respond in the case of an attack, and how you recover. So it is all manageable, but it is something that needs to be thought through at the outset. It's not something you can bolt on afterwards. In particular, the difference between general cybersecurity is that IoT is where the digital meets the physical. So this means that there are different potential dangerous outcomes, and there are also different routes in. So it's over and above a traditional cybersecure approach. So if we're looking at the potential kind of risk and reward here, the point to get across is there's a huge opportunity, total disruption right across every single environment, be that industrial, retail, healthcare, in the home, power generation, agriculture, every single aspect of society. There is a huge potential benefit from the Internet of Things. But you have to think about why we're really doing it, what outcomes you're trying to achieve, and what your particular use case is. And you have to be absolutely clear where the money is going to come from, because you have to invest in ensuring your system's tested properly, maintained properly, and then is secure. Because the threats that are out there, and ongoing threats, not just on day one, throughout the whole lifetime of that system, they're going to need attention, they're going to need effort, they're going to need resources in order to make sure that that system stays and delivers and does not compromise the whole organization. So in summary then, it's about reward and risk. Think strategy, outcomes, use case. Think of your organization's people, process, and product, and how do you convert the technical proposition in IoT into bottom line money for your organization? Because on the other side, you're going to have to invest in security and interoperability to make sure that system delivers. That's really what I was going to go through. We'll be certainly opening for questions at the end, but it's probably worth now moving on to Peter to explore some of the wider implications and looking further into the future. I've looked very much on the here and now over to Peter really to move on.
Well, hi. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you for that really interesting presentation, David. So I'm going to be building on that quite a bit, and I think David said so many important things. And one of the key aspects that I think really came through is that when you're thinking about these broader issues, is that you don't think of them as separate from humans or people, but instead think about the ways in which they can serve and interact with the desires of what people want both individually and collectively. So I think, in the present, talking very seriously about, how is this going to serve your organization? How is this going to serve your business? Is a very good example of the ways in which you don't need to necessarily feel that you have to do this, but rather feeling instead about how should you do this and why should you do this. So what does this mean on a broader level? I think that I would like to focus on a little bit today, and obviously this is, huge issues, is about what this is going to mean for what we think about work and how this is going to potentially affect what our future economic and social relations could look like and what our future notions of production could look like. So a lot of the things I was talking about with the Internet of Things is very much linked to what is commonly referred to as the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And why it's called that is the fact that it represents a new supposed coming epoch of kind of economic production and economic relations that is very much focused on, if you will, new ways of integrating digital technology and virtual technology and artificial intelligence and things like the Internet of Things into our everyday social and economic existence. So what does that mean in a kind of more simple, less esoteric sense? Well, what that definitely means is that you're going to see, and I think David provided a really nice explanation of it, of increasingly self-learning systems. So instead of thinking about ways in which we currently exist, or currently interact, which is very much around, us kind of intentionally, how would I say? Producing the things that we want to produce, often in a mass-produced ways, that what we're actually going to begin to see is that there's a much stronger interaction with our ability to use data and use operating systems in order to better maximize how we live, what we're doing, and how we're using the resources that we're doing now. Now, this can work in a lot of different ways. So, for instance, one of the interesting things that you might begin seeing in terms of production is things like digital fabrication. So some of you may have seen a 3D printer or even own a 3D printer. This would be something in which you would actually begin, having a production process that is much more customizable and is much less about mass production and much more about how do you actually produce things in a way that meets customers' needs and meets your own needs. Now, what is this going to mean though, on a broader level. And I think one of the biggest fears that people have is automation, right? So you probably have seen a lot of scare headlines of things such as we're going to have, mass unemployment. I think there's, even within a kind of public consciousness, I mean, there's this kind of dystopian vision, almost Blade Runner-like, of the fact that people aren't going to have jobs, that robots will take over, and that, we really will be giving up human control of our society in future. And I think there's definitely things that we need to begin thinking about in terms of this disruption, right? So when we think about disruption, I think we're immediately concerned about our own economic insecurity and also what this means for the future society and social stability and who we are. And what I would like to focus today is not to downplay those aspects, but to rather actually be a bit more optimistic, because I think sometimes that element is missing, and also to focus a little bit more on what we can actually begin thinking about in the here and now, about how we can actually shape what this fourth industrial revolution is going to be. So the first aspect about this is to actually say that nothing is set in stone. So how we use this technology and how we engage with this technology, as I think David was saying, is very much still centered around what is needed by people and by how we define what our norms, practices, and goals are. And a key aspect of that is actually understanding what this is going to mean and what the implications of this is going to be for our existing systems. So one of the aspects that comes is, let's take employment. We've talked there's quite a bit of discussion about a kind of unemployment, about how automation is going to take away jobs, talking about, the real fear people have of what this will mean for, their own survival, and also in terms of, on a broader collective level, what this will mean in terms of how people make their living and how people, are able to pursue their dreams and be prosperous. So one of the things then we begin thinking about is, well, what is actually automation able to do? Well, in the present, one of the things automation is able to do is actually allow us to better kind of complete tasks that are oftentimes repetitive and a little bit redundant, and also ones that don't necessarily give us the most sense of empowerment or enjoyment. And that can free us up, and we're already seeing this in terms of automation today, in terms of doing jobs and tasks that we find more creative and more fulfilling, and also something more that, we have more time to invest in that respect. Now, of course, the broader kind of question about that is, well, what would this potentially mean? I mean, are we going to see employment in the same way as we see it now? Will we actually all have jobs? Will we need to have jobs? There's already discussions about, if we have a situation in which we're going to be able to use technology and automation to further progress how we use resources and the amount of time and energy we need to create the things in which we do want. Well, what kinds of social systems can support what many are calling a kind of post-work society? So this could be things like, on a very basic level, like providing universal basic income to people so that, it's not about having to actually go get a job, but actually about ways in which they can find and the best ways in which they can, socially and economically contribute, and also the ways that they find the most enjoyable about it, as opposed from a place of precarity. I think another aspect that we need to be also thinking about is the relationship that we have in terms of time and space. So right now, I mean, I think we're still very much in a very kind of localized mentality where, we realize that we're more globally connected, but we still largely often operate within our own local physical communities. I think what we're going to see is the idea that we're in a much more, if you can say, global, GLOCAL reality, where we're continually interacting with a whole range of different communities and trying to find the ways in which we can use technology to better meet our very specific community needs And those community needs don't have to be just with the people around us, but they can also be in very serious ways with the virtual communities that we're part of. And I think you're going to increasingly see these kinds of ways about how we form networks and how we engage with others. And this will also involve things like open source problem solving. So where actually we, engage with people around the world in various virtual networks in order to help try to solve problems and help to try to, take a lot of global knowledge that exists and, if you will, customize it to our local needs, and then be able to share that with others. So I think, in that respect, it really is a huge discussion for us, and I think for everyone, about what kind of economic system do we want and how can we best create an economic system that gets the best and most empowering elements of technology while mitigating its worst impacts. So I think two other things I want to speak about, and then I think we can really open up the space for questions in terms of this, is the first is beginning to think beyond, though, just the human element. Now, that sounds a bit strange, right? But I think, David put it very, very well in his description of the Internet of Things, which was about the fact that you're going to begin having self-learning systems. And while we don't want to get overly philosophical about this, the ability to have a sense of self-learning, the ability to have an ability to kind of update itself and take in a variety of data and things, will actually mean that we're going to be much more interacting with these kind of virtual systems and much more interacting with this artificial intelligence and being more comfortable with that. And instead of being fearful of that, thinking about what this could mean for the ways in which we personally and collectively mutually design society. So, there's been a lot of talk about what some people have said in kind of big words, but transhumanism, which is thinking about not just the human-centered things, but actually thinking about the varieties of consciousnesses that we're going to engage with and how we can actually interact in ways that best promotes all of our interest. I think we'll bring it down, though, a little bit, there's also ways in which this isn't just in the future, right? We can use a lot of this in the present. So a lot of the research that we do, that we're beginning to do at the Open University and that we're interested in, is how do we use a lot of this quote-unquote future tech for actually advancing some of our core ways of thinking and acting today? So democracy, for instance, governance. How would we use virtual reality to actually improve the ways in which we're democratically and civically connected? An example of that could be instead of just having, abstract debates over social media or elections, but also actually allowing people to create virtual scenarios that better allow representatives and others in the community to better understand their specific needs and ways in which they can be addressed. Another example is the use of mobile-type games to help teach a whole range of different skills, such as how would you create a high-tech cooperative, for instance. So these are things that I think are really exciting developments, and that show actually the ways in which it isn't just in the future that we're talking about, but a lot of these things can be actually used to help bring about the future today in ways that are very empowering for humans.
Okay, that was very interesting. Can you all hear me okay? Yes, Lucy's giving me a thumbs up. Okay, we've got some really interesting questions coming in. I'll start with the later one actually for you, Peter. And it actually says, do you think that education in the future might be automated or roboticized?
I think that's a huge question. I think you're certainly going to see education in the future be done a lot through platforms, clearly. I don't know roboticized, but I think definitely you're going to see the ability for us to share huge amounts of knowledge much more easily and have them much more accessible. What I will say, though, is that I actually think education in the future is going to be actually more people-driven in many ways, and is going to be much more community-based. And the reason I say that is the fact that I think currently, actually, a lot of our education can be seen as roboticized, but in a kind of offhand way, which is, we have very, very, clear standards about, what should be taught. And we kind of have these kind of mass ideas of, what curriculum is. And in many ways, also, we have really kind of treating people as if they're just kind of data points, that we need to kind of see students as that, or seeing students as customers. I think that what you're going to see more in the future is, on the one hand, much more of an ability for people to engage with and freely access a whole range of different expertly created knowledge. And I think you're also going to see much more kind of virtual communities working together to help solve problems and learn from each other and continually update their knowledge. And I think that, if we do move, and this is a big thing, towards a more post-work society, once we reduce some of the employability aspects, you then, I think, can return to having an idea of learning as something much more empowering and much more kind of about improving your community and your lives than it is necessarily instrumental or just about professional development.
Thank you, Peter. We've also another question about disruptive tech versus innovation. Should we pitch as a technology or a business driver to align with appropriate strategy and ownership in each area? I'm not sure which one of you want to take this. Do you think should be David?
I think David, from the business perspective.
Yes.
Okay,
sorry, could you just miss the first part? Just read that through again.
I'll read it again for you. Disruptive tech versus innovation. Should we pitch as a technology or a business driver to align with appropriate strategy and ownership in each area?
One of the key things that I have seen through kind of bitter experience is pitching things as a technology. I would say we're better off pitching things as a solution, even if you're being disruptive and it's something that's going to be a fundamental change in the way of doing things. It's the outcome that's important. And I think we need to focus, rather than on disruptive technology, it's more like disruptive solutions. This is how we can do. There are two ways of doing that. You can either do that through kind of incremental change and say this is how we're going to do things better, or this is now how we're going to do something differently. No matter what it is, it's the outcome that's important. And I think too often I've seen this with the two areas I've seen it most closely with are Internet of Things, and then also within lighting in particular, the adoption of LEDs and electronics into lighting. Quite too often you have a disruptive technology that's looking for a home. Someone's created something and they're out there really pushing, thinking, I've got to find a good use for this. Look at it, can do all that. And the biggest successes are when you actually present it as a solution to a genuine problem that relates to the market that you're talking about. I'm not sure if that 100% answers the question, but the way I would put it is no matter how fantastic the technology is, all that is a route to a solution. You've got to focus on the benefits and the solution that it actually brings.
Thank you very much, David. That actually ties in with another comment we've had, saying that you defined what you meant by disruptive technology at the beginning as machine-to-machine communications, data analysis, and decision-making. And then you went on to importantly state that IoT is merely infrastructure. I think
no, I didn't start. Let me just. Okay. What I'm saying here, I understand what we're saying. What I'm saying is that all of that machine learning and everything itself, it's still a path through to that goal. It's kind of similar, really. And just too often
they've gone on to say.
Yeah,
if I finish it might make more sense. Sorry, David. The only trouble is that it is increasingly a vulnerable infrastructure. I don't know if that makes any difference to your answer.
Absolutely. And okay, so the 2 points here. One is, even if it is machines to machines and learning and all this kind of thing, we've got to focus again, similar kind of point, on what that actual outcome is. So the actual technology at the heart of it is an enabler. It's then what the outcomes are and what we do with that and everything that's really important. And again, it's very, very important there to have that strategy, defined outcomes and use case, rather than saying, here's some technology and bolting that on, which is something I've seen happen too often. And very, very good point that the infrastructure, the more and more items that are added on here, there are vulnerabilities. And I think it will be impossible to say that there is a practical way to guarantee that everything that joins the network, that joins the system, is going to be secure. There was a big push from ARM, I believe, to say the cost of the silicon is such now that, anybody can put this into their system, and, the technology is there to be secure and cost effective. But it's not just the cost of silicon, it's all the development work that has to go around it, and the thought process that has to go into design for secure. And bottom line is, in a very, very competitive world, if there's a way of shaving off a fraction of a percent, then that's what people will do. And you can't guarantee that system, I think, will always be vulnerable. And so the important thing when designing security is accepting the fact that it's going to be a vulnerable system, and then putting certain layers of defenses around the parts that are important. There's an anecdotal story of an incident in a casino in the US where somebody put onto the system, it was a fancy fish tank, I believe, and it was IoT enabled for whatever reason. You could remotely, I don't know, whether it was remote analysis of the fish behavior, whatever it was. Very fancy fish tank, and there was a vulnerability in that, and somebody hacked in to the whole of the casino system through that. The fault there isn't of the guy that put the fish tank in there. It's part of the infrastructure that said, okay, if we're going to be speaking out into the big wide world, this part here needs to be really secure, this part here maybe not so. And so linking everything together, like in the case with the factory, where you could get into the safety systems through remote access, is partitioning and making sure that the areas that need to be secure are really secure, and not just connecting everything up and trusting in the network, because there will always be new vulnerabilities. And so that layered defense, accepting the fact that the network's going to be vulnerable, but also the fact that you're not going to be able to afford or implement high security on everything. It's choosing and picking the areas that do need to be secure and making sure you're isolating them from those wider vulnerabilities.
Thank you very much, David. We've got another one in here. I think this is probably more one for Peter. Fourth industrial revolution. Is there a common understanding of the epochs? 1, agriculture, farm. 2, industrial process automation factory. And 3, information age, web, home. 4, AI decision automate. I can't say that word. I apologise. Automation, thank you. Virtualization, and he said discuss. So over to you, Peter.
So I think that actually, that's very, very close. And I think while there's not necessarily always, like with anything, a clear-cut, singular definition of saying, this is what everyone agrees what it is. Largely, it would be, the first epoch would be kind of the Industrial Revolution. I think the second would largely be, around electrification, which is a key part. A fourth would actually be one that kind of happened in the 60s and 70s and 80s, which is a little bit, people have a lot of different names for it, but it's kind of a little bit about like the streamlining of the processing and rationalization of the processing of industry. And now what you have is exactly what you just described. I think that what is key to this is the fact that these are not just different production processes. They actually bring in and ask us to rethink the social relations and political relations around them. So that in that respect, while you don't want to be too crudely kind of, reductivist in terms of saying like the economy sets everything, what you will be saying is that when we talk about this, we are talking about a potentially, larger social transformation and what this will mean for us. And I think that with that in mind, I think going forward, they do raise these kind of broader issues about how we are going to adjust to this and how we're going to, again, maximize the advantages it can have for us as a society. Now, one of the aspects that I think David nicely put about is thinking about, the disruptive capacity of this. And I think that when we speak about disruption in this respect, we are speaking about, without putting a normative term on it, the fact that it will unsettle a whole range of, existing sets of economic relations, social relations, and political relations, right? It has the potential to be transformative, as opposed to just innovative. But I think David's, really right, and you can upscale this in terms of a broader thing, is that it's also about asking, on the one hand, very, very strongly, what is it that we want to use this technology for, and how can we find the ways to best use it? So how do we make sure that this disruption is actually serving a lot of the interests that we have and desires that we have, and using that as an actually reflective process to think about, well, what are our values and norms, and are they fit for purpose still? And I think the second element to that is actually, in this answering, is how do we create sustainable and robust social structures in order to actually promote this types of risk-taking and innovation and disruption in a way that's positive and feels exciting as opposed to a threat. So I think, there's a whole range of questions that we need to ask ourselves in terms of when we think about the fourth industrial revolution is how do we, unlike in other revolutions, actually create the spaces for transitions that are empowering as opposed to just sometimes, bringing progress but also being quite costly in the medium term.
Thank you very much, Peter. Now, we are running over slightly, and thank you for staying. I would like to ask one last question before we wrap up. On the chat, there's been a lot of concerns about the data issues of this and privacy. Also, especially with the new regulations coming in, GDPR, and how does automation machine to machine affect GDPR? So that's quite an interesting question. I'm not sure whether Peter or David, you'd like to pick that up.
That's one that's kind of very specific to current regulations. Probably best for me to pick this one up. I did a presentation on GDPR just earlier this week. Okay, if we're looking at it very simplistic, the reason behind GDPR, the key principles are transparency, being very open about what data an organization is taking from an individual and what's going to be done with it. Clarity, being absolutely clear on the basis by which that data is taken, what's the legal basis for that, be that consent or legal requirements. And then accountability, as saying, this is how we as an organization prove we're being accountable for that data that belongs to you, is your data, and how we're going to use it. What that means in effect is, the other big point is that the definition of personal data has expanded. So before, basically, it was something that was your name or your specific email address, this kind of thing. And now it has expanded to mean pretty much anything that can be identified and traced to an individual person. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't do any of the things that we're talking about with IoT. All it means is when anyone engages with one of these systems, there has to be something in there that automatically triggers up to say, if you're joining this network, joining the system, becoming part of this process, just a black and white privacy statement that just says, we will need to take these items of data or involved with these parts of data that are relevant to you, and this is how they will be used, and this is your rights in terms of if you want to have visibility of everything we're doing. And providing you're absolutely clear about it and you have a positive consent, then it's not an issue. The issues will then be, what about the third parties you're working with, and how is that managed right the way through the system? The purpose of the General Data Protection Regulation isn't a case of Brussels trying to get in there and stamp something on us all to stop us all from doing business. It is out of genuine concern from the massive escalation in the data that's being generated and how it's being used. So this is more forcing organizations to think about how they value that data and how they value their customers, their employees, and their supply chain as well, how they look after it. So provided that you are transparent about what data you're taking and what you're going to do with it, you are clear about the basis on which you're taking it and on making it clear to the subject what their access rights are, and you are declaring that you're accountable. Yeah, it's not like you can't do it, but you just need to be thinking very carefully about how you're going to secure it, how you're going to track it, and your responsibilities to the subject of that data. If anyone's got more questions on that, feel free to take it up with me. But in principle, it doesn't stop us doing that. It just makes us think very carefully and be very open and transparent with the subjects of the data we're actually taking.
Thank you very much, David. And Richard has put a link which is very useful in there, and we will probably send that out with our follow-up comms. I'm going to end it for today because we have run over. But thank you very much for engaging and giving up your lunchtime. You've been a wonderful audience, and thank you for bearing with us with the slides. We will send out the slide deck in a follow-up email. So it just remains to say thank you to Peter and David, and thank you to Lucy, who has been working tirelessly in the background with the technicalities. I would like to thank you all very much for attending, and don't forget to access the videos for a further insight into the fascinating subject. So I'll just say goodbye, everybody.